Hi, I'm James. In the last video we began a mini-series looking at the plagues in Exodus. We saw that God will, through the plagues, answer Pharaoh's question from chapter 5, who is the Lord that I should obey him? Our look at Exodus 7 verse 7 in the last video showed us that Yahweh claims to be the origin of all existence. He is self-existent. But unlike an ethereal force or a distant deity, Yahweh also acts in human history. The way he acts in human history is the subject of the whole Bible. In a sense, our one question on every page of the Bible could be, what do God's acts in this page tell us about who he is? We also thought about how the plagues are God's right judgment on the whole nation of Egypt for their oppressive slavery and systematic infanticide of Israel. Yet we also saw God's patience and mercy. Rather than killing everyone on the spot, he chooses to cause plagues. Yahweh gives the people of Egypt the opportunity to recognize who he is and to respond to him. It is this God who undertakes the plagues on Egypt. The structure of the first plague establishes a cycle which will be repeated and contrasted for each future plague. Each plague consists of God's declaration, which we get here, then the plague occurring, and then Pharaoh's response. In the first plague, God declares his intention. By this you will know that I am the Lord, and that the water of the Nile will be turned into blood. Here, the author of creation will show his power over the very atomic structure of creation. The narrator repeats practically word for word what God says in this section, in the next section, to show that this is not Aaron performing a magic trick, but that it is the will of Yahweh. His words cause change and transformation. But as we see in the last section of this plague, Pharaoh hardens his heart because the Egyptian magicians, they replicate the sign. He refuses to ponder this remarkable act and does not release Israel. The end of the narrative also gives us a glimpse of God's nature. We spoke last video about how if God's judgment against Egypt was just, it would have been quite effective just to kill them all off. Well, here was the opportunity. All of the water that was in the Nile and had been stored up had been rendered undrinkable. Surely that should have been the end of it. But the narrator gives us two very brief comments worth pondering on. Why didn't God's plague affect the water table? See verses 24 and 25. The Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Now in the chapter heading, verse 25 appears just before verse 1 in chapter 8, lumping it with the next section. But if we look at these two verses together in context, in verse 24, the Egyptians dig wells, which according to verse 25 is effective because a week later the nation is still standing. It seems that God did not want this plague to be lethal. He is mercifully giving Egypt the opportunity to recognize his power and nature and to turn to him. Now the second plague follows the same threefold structure. Yahweh declares his intention that there will be frogs on the country, in verses 1 through 5. The plague happens in verse 6. The second plague follows the same three-part structure. First, Yahweh declares his intention that there will be frogs on the land. Here he shows his power to command animals as he summons hordes of frogs into Egypt. Next, Aaron does as Moses says, and frogs come up out of the water, just as God declared. Finally, we get Pharaoh's response. Like the first plague, the magicians seem to replicate it. But strangely, Pharaoh doesn't just harden his heart. Instead, he turns to Moses and Aaron for prayer. It's not quite clear what Pharaoh's motive is here. In Hebrew narrative, it is common for the narrator to imply something that we ought to infer. Why would Pharaoh go to his enemies for help? Especially when he's got magicians who seem that they can keep up with the God of creation. Perhaps it became clear that they could only copy what they saw. They couldn't reverse, but only increase the plagues, which isn't all that helpful when your nation is overrun by frogs. It's possible that Pharaoh was just hedging his bets. He certainly doesn't seem in a rush for Moses and Aaron to pray to fix the problem. But whatever the motive, we see another instance of mercy from Yahweh here. At the sign of Pharaoh's cry for help, the Lord answers prayer and removes the frogs. He kills them off. But when the threat had subsided, Pharaoh hardens his heart again. He refuses to let Israel go and stubbornly rejects the deal that he made with Moses. In the third plague, we get the same three-part structure, but it's slightly different. We still get Yahweh's declaration, but this time he doesn't tell Moses and Aaron to go and see Pharaoh. This is just unilateral judgment performed without warning. The dust turns into gnats, just as the Lord said. In this, he shows his power to create even life. And this time, the magicians cannot replicate the plague. Pharaoh's divine specialists concede that the power on display has to be from Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he turns against even his own advisors. Now, this third plague shows us that Yahweh is merciful to give opportunity to those who don't deserve it. He has given the plagues. He's not just killed Egypt off. He's responded to the request for prayer in the last plague. He is merciful to give an opportunity to those who don't deserve it. But an outstretched hand is meant to be grasped, not ignored. Pharaoh is being given reason to obey God, but he just does not want to. That is the problem in his heart. Now, obedience to Yahweh is not losing the battle or accepting second best. It is instead recognizing the authority of the creator of the universe and trusting that his plans for us are the best possible plans. God told the prophet Ezekiel what his plans were for his people in chapter 32:26. He says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. It is that stone heart that Pharaoh is cultivating even now. The heart that hates the God who is perfect justice and grace, love and patience and mercy, among many other things. It is God's plan through Jesus Christ to give all who will turn to him hearts of flesh, hearts that more fully recognize the goodness of God's nature and purposes. We're given the opportunity to see some of that now in what God is doing in Egypt. How will Pharaoh respond to the next cycle of plagues? Will he see and respond to who God is? That is the subject of the next video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If you'd like to talk about any of the things, to ask a question or to offer some thoughts, I'd really love to hear what you've got to say. So do please get in touch. In the next video, we will look at the second cycle of plagues, plagues 4 through 6. I'll see you then.